In the bustling markets of 9th century Baghdad, where merchants haggled over silk and spice, where scholars argued over law and theology in the shadow of grand mosques, there lived a man who sold glassware by day and searched for God by night. His name was Junaid al-Baghdadi, and though his hands were stained with the dust of his trade, his heart was occupied with a question that has haunted every sincere seeker since the beginning of time. How does a human being draw near to the divine without losing themselves in the process? Junaid was born into a world that was intoxicated by its own progress. Baghdad was the center of the civilized world, a city of libraries and translation houses, where Greek philosophy was being rendered into Arabic, where mathematics and medicine were flourishing, where the caliphs built palaces that seemed to touch the sky. Yet amid all this material and intellectual abundance, a quiet hunger persisted in the hearts of certain men and women who felt that something essential was being lost. They sensed that knowledge without purification and worship without sincerity were empty vessels. These were the early Sufis, and Junaid would become one of their most towering figures, often called the Sheikh of Sheikhs, the master whose sobriety and depth shaped the entire trajectory of Islamic spirituality for centuries to come. What made Junaid different from many of his contemporaries was his insistence on balance. This was an age when mysticism could easily tip into excess. Some seekers spoke in riddles so wild they were accused of heresy. Others abandoned the outward practice of religion entirely, believing that once the heart was purified, the body's duties no longer mattered. Junaid rejected both extremes. He taught that the inward and outward must move together, like two wings of a single bird. A person could not soar toward truth while neglecting prayer, fasting, and the basic discipline of the soul, nor could they fulfill the letter of the law while their heart remained hard and unexamined. This is perhaps the first piece of his hidden wisdom that deserves our attention. Spirituality is not an escape from responsibility, but the very thing that gives responsibility its depth and meaning. One of the stories told about Junaid captures this perfectly. A young man came to him full of energy and conviction, declaring that he had renounced the world entirely. He had given away his possessions, abandoned his family obligations, and now wished only to sit in contemplation. Junaid listened patiently, then asked him a simple question. He asked whether the young man's heart had been emptied of love for the very things he claimed to have renounced. The young man fell silent, because he realized that he had simply moved his attachments from objects to the idea of his own renunciation. Junaid then explained something profound. True detachment is not about what your hands are holding, but about what your heart is clinging to. A person can own nothing and still be a slave to desire. A person can possess everything and remain entirely free if their heart does not depend on it. This single teaching dismantles a misunderstanding that persists even today. The idea that spiritual progress is measured by how much a person gives up externally rather than how free their inner world has become. Junaid's own life embodied this principle. He continued working in the marketplace even as his spiritual reputation grew. He did not retreat into a cave or abandon his trade to appear holy. He believed that the marketplace itself could become a place of remembrance, that a person fully present with God does not need to flee from ordinary life, but can transform ordinary life into worship through sincerity of intention. This is a teaching that speaks directly to anyone in the modern world who feels that spiritual depth requires escaping their job, their family, or their daily obligations. Junaid would say otherwise. He would say that the marketplace and the mosque are not enemies, that a person who buys and sells honestly, who treats others with integrity, who remembers their creator even while counting coins, has achieved something many ascetics in isolation never reach. Another dimension of Junaid's wisdom concerns the nature of the self, what the Sufis call the nafs. He taught that the greatest veil between a person and truth is not external sin, but the subtle pride and self-regard that hides within even our acts of devotion. A person can pray for years and still be worshipping their own image of themselves as a pious person, rather than worshipping with sincerity. Junaid warned his students constantly about this trap, because it is the most difficult to see. External sins are visible, they prick the conscience, they can be repented and corrected. But the quiet satisfaction one feels in being recognized as righteous, the comparison one makes against others who seem less devout, the attachment to one's own spiritual achievements, these are far more dangerous because they disguise themselves as virtue. There is a story of Junaid weeping, not over his failures, but over his successes. When asked why a man so advanced in knowledge and practice would weep, He explained that he feared the subtle joy he felt in his own progress more than he feared any sin, because sin announces itself, while spiritual pride creeps in silently and convinces a person that they no longer need to struggle. This kind of self-awareness, this refusal to ever consider oneself finished or arrived, is one of the most enduring lessons from his life. Growth, in his view, was not a ladder one climbs and then stands triumphantly at the top of. It was a continuous returning, a constant humbling, a perpetual willingness to see one's own flaws, even as one's outward reputation grew. Junaid also taught extensively about the concept of fana, often translated as annihilation of the ego, and baka, the subsistence or abiding that follows it. This is one of the more subtle aspects of his teaching, and it has often been misunderstood both by his critics in his own time and by modern readers encountering Sufi thought for the first time. Fana does not mean the destruction of the person, nor does it mean merging into the divine in a way that erases the distinction between creator and creation. Junaid was always careful, almost meticulous, in preserving the boundary between God and the human being, even while describing the most intimate spiritual states. What he meant by annihilation was the dissolving of the ego's false sense of independence, the illusion that the self is the true actor behind its own thoughts, desires, and achievements. When that illusion falls away, what remains is not nothingness, but a clearer, more honest existence, one that recognizes its complete dependence on its source. This is baka, the abiding that follows annihilation, a return to ordinary life, but transformed, grounded, and clear-sighted. This careful, almost scientific precision in describing inner states is part of why Junaid is remembered as the master of sobriety in Sufism. In contrast to mystics whose experiences were ecstatic and intoxicated, he believed that the highest spiritual station was not the one where a person loses control and speaks wildly under the weight of overwhelming experience, but the one where a person, having tasted profound nearness to the divine, returns to full presence of mind and is able to function with wisdom, discipline, and service to others. Intoxication, in his view, was often a phase, sometimes necessary, but never the destination. Sobriety, the ability to carry deep spiritual insight while remaining grounded, responsible, and clear, was the true mark of maturity. This distinction matters enormously, even for people who have no interest in formal mysticism. Many seekers in any tradition mistake intensity of feeling for depth of understanding. They chase emotional highs, dramatic experiences, moments of overwhelming inspiration, and mistake these for spiritual progress. Junaid's wisdom gently corrects this. He would ask, what good is an experience that leaves you unable to fulfill your duties, unable to treat people with patience, unable to think clearly? True spiritual progress should make a person more capable of ordinary life, not less. It should make them better parents, better workers, better neighbors, more patient, more humble, more useful to those around them. If a spiritual experience leaves someone arrogant, erratic, or disconnected from their responsibilities, Junaid would have questioned whether it was a sign of progress at all. Junaid also placed enormous emphasis on the role of a teacher, a guide, someone further along the path who could help a sincere seeker recognize their own blind spots. He famously said that anyone without a guide is like a traveler, without a map in unfamiliar terrain, capable of convincing themselves they are moving toward their destination while actually wandering further away from it. This humility before guidance stands in contrast to a tendency, common in every era including our own, to believe that spiritual insight can be entirely self-taught, that a person can read enough books or have enough private experiences to bypass the need for accountability to someone wiser. Junaid's own life demonstrates this principle, as he himself studied under several teachers before becoming one, and he never positioned himself as having arrived at a point beyond the need for correction. Perhaps the most quietly radical aspect of Junaid's teaching is his insistence that love, not fear, should be the foundation of one's relationship with the divine, while never excusing a person from discipline and law. Many traditions in his era leaned heavily on fear of punishment as the primary motivator for righteous behavior. Junaid did not deny the reality of accountability, but he taught that the deepest transformation in a person's character comes not from terror, but from love, from a genuine longing to be close to what is good, true, and beautiful. Fear might restrain a person from wrongdoing, but only love compels a person toward excellence, toward giving more than is required, toward kindness that is not transactional. This is why his teachings on love became foundational for generations of later mystics, including some of the most celebrated poets and thinkers who came after him. As we reflect on the entirety of Junaid al-Baghdadi's hidden wisdom, what emerges is not a set of mystical riddles meant only for advanced initiates, but a remarkably practical guide to living with integrity. Detach your heart from what you possess, even if your hands continue to hold it. Remain suspicious of your own pride, especially when it wears the mask of piety. Seek balance between inward sincerity and outward discipline, refusing to sacrifice one for the other. Measure your spiritual growth not by how intense your private experiences are, but by how much calmer, kinder, and more responsible you become in ordinary life. Do not walk this path entirely alone, but seek the correction of those wiser than yourself. And above everything, let love, not fear, be the engine that drives your transformation. These are not relics of a distant century. They are tools, sharpened over more than 1,000 years of practice, still capable of cutting through the noise of a distracted age and pointing a sincere heart back toward what truly matters.